Welcome back to Newsmaker Live with Laura. If it's Wednesday, it's Newsmaker Live, where we make your stories our stories. Today, November 25th, 2015, marked the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls. In St. Lucia, we say children, because a lot of our children are vulnerable, and it seems that abuse is abuse, and the perpetrators of which do not really discriminate. Let me just share with you some facts and figures. It is estimated that 35% of women worldwide have experienced either physical or sexual intimate partner violence or sexual violence by a non-partner at some point in their lives. Some studies actually show that up to 70% of women have experienced physical and or sexual violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime. That's a stunning piece of fact, a piece of statistic right there. In 1993, the UN General Assembly declared the elimination of violence against women and provided a framework for the action on the pandemic. Their word, not mine, a pandemic. 20 years later, 1 in 3 women still experience physical or sexual violence, mostly by an intimate partner. And I'll stop here for now. You know, earlier this week I was speaking to a friend, a male friend, and he said to me, "Laura, I'm afraid of you." I said, "Why?" He said, "I hear you speak about rape." And that is sort of my words here, I'm just paraphrasing, put the fear of God in him. And he says, "You know what? I could just imagine us just," and it was not being inappropriate. Let me just say, we have these kinds of conversations, and we should have these kinds of conversations between males and females. And he was saying, let's just say we were intimate and, you know, things are going beautifully. And, you know, all of a sudden you said, "Stop." I said, "So? You stop." But he just wasn't comfortable with the whole thought of just being intimate with a person who is very passionate about sexual abuse and rape and sexual assault. And I had to stop and think and try to put myself in his shoes for a moment. And I said to myself, the problem here is education. The problem here is education. We have for so long raised our girls to be submissive, be seen and not be heard. Meanwhile, our boys are allowed to go out there and to do whatever they please, get in any amount of trouble. You know, boys will be boys, you know, they can go ahead and do anything, but our girls have always been taught to be submissive, seen and not be heard. And so it means that we now have to do a sort of reacculturation of our people. You know, there's a saying that goes, you cannot unlearn what you've learned. Well, we're going to have to try to figure that one out, and pretty quickly, because it will really take a re-engineering of our thoughts to be able to get this pandemic under control. I have a guest this evening, and she's very well known. A lot of people have been clamoring for her because a few years back she had been very, very vocal when it came to women's rights and issues dealing with women. And I wouldn't say that she'd taken a hiatus, but, you know, life goes on. We grow into new roles, and she is one of those who has grown into another role, or a greater role, taking or encompassing more than just the St. Lucian context. And she's none other than Flavia Sherry of CAFRA. And she's consented to be with, I could not imagine a day like today without Flavia Sherry. I mean, she's one of those constant people who have always been speaking out, and some of the work she has done in this country for vulnerable women and children is just downright scary. So, without further ado, Mrs. Sherry, welcome. Welcome back to DBS. Welcome back to into the thick of things. I know you're just here for a little while before you head out to France.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you, Laura, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, I have come back in the thick of things. I'm actually leaving tomorrow for Paris. I'm going to attend a conference of parties for the International Conference on Climate Change. I, of course, attended the last one in Germany, and this is actually very critical for us. So it's an area that CAFRA is also interested in. We've done a certain amount of advocacy and lobbying, and also educating, especially educating women and persons generally in the community about the issue of climate change, because we recognize how very critical it is for us. But of course, tonight is not about climate change.
Right.
Today is the International Day Against Violence Against Women, and so I'm happy to be here. This is my last day before I travel tomorrow. I'm actually happy to be here to discuss this topic with you.
Right. It's a little scary though, going off to France at this time.
I know. It is actually one of those trips that I'm a little bit concerned about, because based on what has happened in Paris and the fact that those persons who are fundamentalists will be fundamentalists, and they may try to be a little more extreme. And Paris is going to be one of the biggest conferences, because Germany was actually in preparation for that. And there were so many people in Germany, but I know Paris is going to be many times the number.
But for me, it's even scarier because these fundamentalists don't really have a lot of respect for women, and so from that aspect, I'm thinking it's even doubly scary for any woman going into the thick of things there.
And it's all of these things that I've taken into consideration. I recognize that it's going to be very difficult for me to come out of my commitment to go, but I'm also very passionate about the topic and the work that I've continued to do, especially having been in Germany and seen the direction in which the negotiations went. I think it's very critical also for me to be here, because St. Lucia, as a small island developing state, is extremely vulnerable to climate change. We can literally vanish off the face of the earth if the government's request and position of 1.5 to stay alive is not part of that agreement. And our push is really for a very comprehensive, legally binding agreement that is gender responsive, and that also has general respect for human rights. So that is the position of CAFRA. That is the position that we ascribe to with women globally, and so it's very important for us to be in Paris, and especially now in my new role as head of CAFRA regionally. If I were to chicken out, what's going to happen to the other persons around the region who are going as part of our team? So it really, there really is almost no option to go. But I think it's a very critical conference, and I know that the government of France is doing everything in its power to ensure that security is to the max. They may even be bringing in additional troops and forces, and only today I got an email advising that there were some other concessions and stuff that's being made to ensure that we who go are safe. But the point you made in relation to the fundamentalists and the fact that they generally don't have respect for women and women's autonomy, it's a concern, because as part of our work in Paris, as civil society, because I'm part of the civil society network around this, there are going to be a lot of actions by women in Paris, and my fear is that there's a possibility, of course, that where women are congregated in their thousands, that might be a target area. So I'm just determined to be cautious, but you can only be so cautious.
That's right. But that's admirable that you guys are still, you're soldiers, not brownies.
You're not giving up.
That you're going to motor on and tackle the task at hand. Bravely, very bravely. But what do you think about some of the statistics that I mentioned earlier before I introduced you? 70% of women, would have been violated.
It is not surprising, because patriarchy is a global phenomenon. and all of it's not just in these countries where you have a lot of fundamentalism. It's across the world, and various countries have made various strides in terms of women's empowerment and ensuring that there's overall respect for human rights. But we still have a long way to go in terms of even our socialization and ensuring that the way, like you said, that we bring up our children do not create some of the problems that we have today, and also working towards some of the cultures and the norms that all feed into a lot of the inequalities that women face. So the statistics, it's alarming, but not surprising. But I think we can do a lot.
That's the sad thing about it. As alarming as it is, it really isn't surprising for us women, some of us anyway. And I say this because I was discussing with this friend of mine, and I said to him, 1 in 3 women would have been, violent. He said, oh, no, it couldn't be. I said, yes, it is the fact. He says, not my facts. I said, well, unfortunately, that's an opinion. And, your opinion, unless it is backed by research and stats, it really isn't what is critical.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is 1 in 3 women still experience physical and sexual violence, particularly by intimate partners, 20 years after the UN has already made provisions to tackle this pandemic. What do you think, in your vast experience, would you allocate for our non-propelling into fixing that problem or solving that problem?
It's a myriad of things, Laura. It's not something you can just put one finger on and say this is the problem. I think it's so multifaceted and we need to address it. Do so in a very holistic manner. Because of our socialization, we need to look at that area very seriously. We have to work on issues of behavior. We need to look at behavior change. We need to look at education across the board, whether it be at the school level, at the level of the police, at the level of the society and various community groups and so on. We also need to take into consideration that in a lot of societies where there are resource constraints, that in itself leads to lack of justice, because if you don't have a system that is very quick, justice delayed can sometimes appear to be justice denied. If you have a system where some of the problems that we have, that it not only will take a lot of time, but we are in a small society and everybody knows everybody, and sometimes there are various moves afoot to deny justice in various ways. We also have to look at the fact that the way we even educate ourselves, we have not, I think, come to grips with a lot of the issues that have brought us even as a race to the point at which we are, so that we could understand why we need to love one another and care for each other, and why our men should really be doing everything in their power to protect their women, whether it is their mothers, their sisters, their daughters, their aunts, and so on. So I think it's a multifaceted thing, and of course I think the community has a very critical role to play if we have to make any dent, and it has to be across the board. It has to be men and women in a partnership working towards eliminating gender-based violence. It cannot be one way.
Now, I like the fact that you said it has to be men and women working together to remove or eliminate this scourge. One of the things, you were at the march today. What were your thoughts, first of all, on the march?
To be very honest, I was a little disappointed. I thought there could have been more people, and because my agenda for the day was so packed, after you see me, I couldn't stay around very long because I just had so many things to do. But I felt that it was very, very good because of the fact that it showed a very good mix. It showed that there is beginning to be more sensitivity among the young people, the very young ones. I saw some very young boys. I was very heartened by this. I saw men who came and all spoke about this being an issue which concerns them. And traditionally before, it wasn't very common to see men participating, but I was very heartened by that.
As you say this, let us take in one of the clips from the men, one of the men who were there. I think Dr. Claudia Sprayville spoke at the march, well, rather at the beginning of the march, and he gave his thoughts on what he thought the day signified and what we should do, what they should do as men to help combat this scourge. Let's hear from Dr. Claudius Prevost now.
Joining this march day, what does it mean to you to be a part of this?
For me, it's extremely important. To start with, I have a mother, I have sisters, I have a wife, and I take the issue of violence against women very seriously. I think when we think about, a 97-year-old woman being raped, this is very serious. We have reached the bottom of the pot, and something has to be done. And that's why I'm here. I'm standing proud in solidarity with all women, especially on this important day as well. I think the message has to be sent to the entire country that St. Lucian men will not tolerate what a minority of the men are doing to our women. I am not here in any political capacity. I believe there is a genuine cause. This is a cause that every man alive in St. Lucia should be supporting. Even the perpetrators themselves should be thinking hard about it today. This is not about anything else. This is all about the rights of women and the need for greater expression for women in St. Lucia.
And so we just heard it from Dr. Claudius Prevost. What did you think about his comments there?
I thought his comments were very encouraging, and I would really like to see more men come out and make those kinds of statements, because in our process of advocacy, I come across many men who say, this is just not me, I would never get involved in this, but men need to also let their voices be heard. They need to say that very emphatically and with a lot of conviction, so that men generally across the board will understand that this is just not normal. I mean, what kind of behavior, why would anyone want to violate another one's right in that manner? And so it's very important, I think, to have men in on this discussion and also as advocates.
Now, I hear you, and I couldn't agree with you more, but I can't stop thinking that maybe we should really be tackling the young boys. Today at the march, there were a number of school children. There were some older boys from the South Louis Community College, and then there were some little ones. But the vast majority of the primary school students who were in attendance were little girls. And they were energetic. They took this to this thing like a fish to water, and I was so proud of them. Bravo to you girls who were at the march today. You did a fantastic job. If I didn't believe in the cause then, I believe in it now, because you really showed how powerful you could be. However, Flavia, I was quite disappointed that there weren't more boys. I would have thought that the schools would have taken the opportunity, or the parents of young boys would have profited the opportunity to have their young boys, the future men of our country, not of our generation, we're on our way out already, but their generation, to come out and be a part of this. Because I think that when you start at such a young age, you grow up with it. What do you think about that?
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Laura, and I think it's so critical that the society across the board deals with the issue of gender-based violence and deals with the issue of inequalities, and also deal with the issue of patriarchy, which is having a serious impact on us as a society. I think it speaks volumes about the level of understanding that exists at these various institutional levels. And perhaps they're just, I always, every now and then I think, sometimes we understand certain things, we have a good sense of what could be the solution to a particular issue, but there's no one consistent mobilizer of everybody. And it could be that some persons are just not educated, and it could be that some people just need to be galvanized and pushed to do it. Perhaps if we had some kind of national mobilization office or something like that, but when it comes to those kinds of causes, in terms of national development, that across the board all schools and everybody would be contacted and would be inspired to get the boys out and would push the boys into standing up against violence and doing, standing on principle when it comes to issues of social dislocation in the country. So I think there is some kind of a gap that I don't know how we can address it, but I think I hear what you say, but I know quite often everybody's waiting for somebody else to do it. And I say this because for so many years, Laura, I voluntarily, because many people don't understand, in the work that we do, there's nothing in any contract that I've ever had that said that I I'm duty bound to speak out on behalf of anything or anybody. I did this entirely voluntarily. And it's so amusing and interesting that because of my unavailability over an extended period of time, people, instead of calling and saying, I'm outraged about this, I'm unhappy about that, would call to say, but where is
Flavia Sherry?
Yeah, I mean, I literally,
because
you know that we buy this.
For instance, you're going to Paris. Suppose you don't come back.
And I'm going to Paris until the 18th of December.
But let's just say you don't come back at all.
Exactly.
You know, heaven forbid, we're not asking, Father, we're, you know, really not. We wanted to come back. But let's just say, heaven forbid, you don't come back. What do we do? Do we now sit on our hands and say,
there's no Flavia Cherry, so
there's no Flavia Cherry.
So nobody will stand and speak out. Nobody will put their nose forward. Nobody will put their neck on a block for anybody.
And that seems
everybody
to be
waiting for one individual.
Yes.
Because it seems like that person is duty bound or bound to do. I just find that I'm just always so amazed. Sometimes it's amusing, but it's also sometimes extremely annoying, because I feel that if somebody can take the energy to call a show or call anyway, why are you calling to say you want somebody else to see something?
Yeah.
When you could, in the very process of making the call, speak your mind. And
But
I think
you know,
it's a culture of dependence that we need people who have to come forward and do
that's
things
just
for
it,
us.
the culture of dependence.
Exactly.
But what even irks me, it's frustrating for you, but what irks me is that you have these organizations, and then you have people who are supposed to be communications officers or PROs and that kind of thing. And they'll say, no, thanks, I don't want to do an interview, or at least not a live interview, or not an on-air interview, or... but how exactly are you proposing to do advocacy? And how exactly are you proposing to do the things that you've been mandated to do? You know, there's just certain roles that there doesn't need a stipulation in a contract, just by virtue of
your social conscience.
Yes.
As long as you have a social conscience. And that's why, Laura, I have said that all men and women of conscience should speak out about injustice. And don't wait for any one person to, okay, this is the person, we want you to be the one speaking. Because a lone voice will never be effective. It's a multitude of voices.
Right.
It's everybody coming together. With unity, you have amazing strength. So you cannot depend on one organization or one advocate. Everybody has to come together. Everybody have to let their voices be heard. And I think that is a real issue in St. Lucia. We need more persons willing to stand out and speak out. Because very often, if you're going to speak about an issue of gender-based violence, what is there to fear? Gender-based violence is an issue. And even if you are not one who is raped now, who says you're not going to be raped tomorrow?
You know,
and who is safe?
But you know, actually, it's interesting that you should say that, because a conversation we overheard today was one that, and from a woman, mind you, that's just not my cup of tea. I've never been raped. What am I marching for? You know, you really don't know. But you know, rape is not gender biased. Rape doesn't care about your status. Rape doesn't care about whether you have been raped before. Rape doesn't care about whether you think you will be raped. Even countries like Canada, that is so often not on the radar, 1 out of every 2 women will be violated in Canada.
It's interesting you said that, because I met someone just this week, and he was giving me a particular scenario. He said there was a case that didn't go forward, because we know even the stats that we have does not adequately reflect all the rapes, because there are a lot of people who will say, I am not going to come forward because I don't want to be in the spotlight on this, it's embarrassing, etc. But this particular gentleman was saying to me that there was a particular case, very recent, where a taxi was hijacked, and there were 2 white tourists. And when the matter went, I said, are you sure? He said, when the matter went to the police, and the ladies were explaining what happened, the ladies then said the taxi driver was also affected. And when the ladies were looking at him expecting, okay, now we're making this report, you should be. They said, no. So it's very embarrassing. Me, a taxi driver, being raped. No, I'm not going to report this.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you made that point, because nobody is, I mean, you just never know what's going to happen.
You just never know.
It takes a really sick, perverted, twisted individual to want to rape another individual, and nobody knows where, how, or
regardless of sex.
Exactly.
Regardless of sex. We're due for a break. When we come back, more with our guest Flavia Sherry and more statistics on rape. Stay tuned.